Hey, Slater Crusaders, America's the greatest country in the world. Thanks for being here. Tomorrow's special, we're going to talk about unity, what it looks like. Is it good? How do we get there? If so, and we have amazing guest, Victor Davis Hansen's going to be here, and Dr. Ben Carson as well. I want to talk about something in this segment that I think we should all be able to unite on. It's about lockdowns, but two different types of lockdowns that are opposite from each other. We need to end one lockdown and we need to start another lockdown. What am I talking about? Let's start here. Start with COVID. COVID lockdowns. Those are the ones that we need to end. Now, wherever you've been this whole last year on COVID, if you thought the lockdowns were necessary and super important and you think masks are the best and the vaccine's amazing and everyone needs to take it, if you think Cuomo's a hero and Trump is a monster, and if you think all Republicans are anti-vax, fire-breathing COVID deniers, fine, all good. Let's put that all behind us and let's look at where COVID is now, today. Let's reevaluate where COVID is today and what actions we should take now and moving forward. Reevaluation is always a wise idea, right? I'm worried that there's too many people who are still acting like it's whatever, June or July or whenever like the second wave was. Like that's not the case anymore. We need to reevaluate. Someone told me a while back that every month you should reevaluate the things that you expect out of your children. That's really good advice, right? Because every month they're getting older and they're able to handle more responsibility and you can have higher expectations on them, right? So maybe one month they can't, you can't expect them to clean their plate or clear the table off, but the next month maybe they can, right? So you need to always reevaluate. Otherwise, they're never clearing the table and you're still treating them like a baby and they're 18 years old, right? So reevaluate every month in life and with COVID. So let's reevaluate our COVID posture based off what we know today, and we should be able to unite around this because this is very good news. Now, I don't know where it's like where you are. I don't know if you live in America. I live in California. San Diego, not even California, but just San Diego, just allowed yesterday restaurants to open at 25% capacity, gyms at 10%, wineries at like 20%, but they have to close at 8% for some reason. Churches can finally open at 25%. Thank you, Lord Newsom, for that. Now listen, the good news is we have reached herd immunity. We did a segment a while back about the definition of herd immunity. So herd immunity is the amount of people, well, I'll tell you this, the WHO for years defined herd immunity as the number of people who have a vaccine or have natural immunity. And if it's enough people, then the virus doesn't spread anymore. There's not enough people to get it and carry it. Herd immunity. They changed the definition at the WHO. Now the definition of the WHO is only people who are vaccinated. They don't count anymore natural immunity. But that's not accurate. That's wrong. We asked Professor Vincent Racaniello, who again we talk to every Monday, he's the virologist of Columbia University. I asked him if everyone needs to be vaccinated. Here's what he said.
Not everyone has to be vaccinated. Absolutely. That's what herd immunity is about. It's the immunity in a population that you need to stop spread of the virus. All right. Now for SARS-CoV-2, it's somewhere between 50 and 70%. If we go higher, that's great. But I think we don't need to get higher than that. It's a combination of natural infections and vaccination. And remember, in the U.S., we are underreporting infections. The last estimate from the CDC is about 5-fold. We're missing about 1 in 5 infections. And in some states, it's 1 in 10. So the amount of immunity is probably higher than we think it is. And I think that's why we're seeing a decrease in the U.S., because between the vaccination and the natural infections, which are way more than we think, I think we're starting to approach that level, maybe 50%, and you can see the number of infections going down.
So we've had 3.6 million known COVID cases. That's known. You multiply that by whatever percentage is actual COVID cases. We've added 13 million vaccines to that number as well. We're already above the 50% right now and still growing. And we should, people want vaccines, you go get the vaccines, but we're there. We got it. Let's not snipe at each other anymore, right? This is great news. We should be able to unite on this. Congratulations. We made it. We can stop now. We got the herd immunity. We did it. Stop with the masks. Stop with the distancing. Stop with looking at our fellow human being as a disease vector. It's over. Yesterday we talked about the R0 in Israel is 0.78. It's below 1. That's it. That means it's not spreading, right? That's it. But there's too many people who are right now reluctant to go back to normal until what? There's zero threat of ever getting sick. Can't live like that. It's way past time to open everything up again. Even John Kerry knows this. This is John Kerry on his flight yesterday. Maskless. He knows the threat's over. Don't listen to what he says. Watch what he does. New York Magazine did an article, How the West Lost COVID. And it was about how so many rich countries got it wrong. And really why America did so bad with COVID. I'll give my answers here. And there's things that no one wants to hear or talk about. A couple reasons why a lot of Americans died. First, we're an older country. Countries in Africa don't have a lot of old people. People over 65 are 15% of the American population, but 80% of COVID deaths. And 65 is not old, right? I'm talking about people over 80, right? We have a lot of old people in America. Obviously, we're gonna have more deaths because of that. Second, Americans are very overweight and unhealthy. We have a lot of obesity, heart disease, diabetes, and almost all the deaths were people with comorbidities that are very American. Third reason why there are a lot of deaths in America is we like freedom. China or some other countries, they can lock down easier because they're not a free people and they don't mind the government telling them what to do. We do mind the government telling us. And I'd rather, maybe to a fault at times, but I'd rather live in a free country than a compliant one. And the fourth reason why there's so many deaths in America is because we're not an island. I hate when it's ridiculous. People compare us to, oh, well, in New Zealand, it's like, well, New Zealand's an island. It's a lot easier contained than a massive country like America. So that's why America had a lot of cases and a lot of deaths. It had nothing to do with Trump. Yes, of course, we could have done things differently and better at times. Maybe if Cuomo didn't force COVID patients back into nursing homes, for instance, there's a couple tens of thousands of deaths right there. But it's over. Put all that behind us. There's another day where we can talk more about that, but it's done. That is good news. It's a miracle that we got a vaccine when we did. So let's move on with our lives. Put the masks away. And no more looking at each other like we're walking Ebola. All right, so that's the first lockdown. That's got to end. Second lockdown, we need the border. We've got to lock it down. More and more people, even on the left, are starting to see this. I got to give some credit here to CBS News. This is how they introed their show the other day.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us. We're going to begin with a humanitarian crisis on the southern border that is growing larger and more dire by the day. Tonight, we have got the stunning new numbers. Sources tell CBS News more than 13,000 migrant children who entered the country without their parents are now in U.S. custody. The government says even more adults are being turned back every day. The Secretary of Homeland Security admitting today that so many people are now crossing the border, his department is on pace to stop more migrants than in the past 20 years. And with so many children, including toddlers, now flooding into the country, CBS News has learned the Biden administration is running out of space to house them and people to process their claims. Now, President Biden said today he has no plans to visit the border right now. And DHS Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas says while the situation is difficult, his department is tackling it. But critics of Mr. Biden, including Republicans in Congress, are blaming the president tonight for rolling back the strict border policies of the Trump administration.
Oh, yeah, they're tackling it. This is by design. This crisis, there doesn't need to be a border crisis. There doesn't need to be a border surge at all. Yes, it's definitely because Democrats think that these people coming across will one day vote Democrat. As I've always said, if people from Latin America and South America voted Republican, Nancy Pelosi would be mixing the cement herself to build that wall brick by brick. She'd be mixing mortar day and night to make sure that no more evil brown Republicans come into America. I'm not against immigrants for that reason because I think they're going to vote Democrat. Honestly, I think over time they'll end up voting Republican, as we saw a lot of that with Hispanic vote in this last election. Voting has nothing to do with it to me. There's two issues why we need to lock down the border, end the lockdowns with COVID, restart the lockdowns at the border. The first is the humanitarian crisis, as Nora O'Donnell nicely put it there. It's not safe for them. Women raped, children kidnapped, smuggled multiple times with strangers by drug cartels. What is wrong with us? Seriously, what is wrong with the people who allow this to go on? That is super messed up. Like, oh yeah, no problem. Let's let the drug cartels kidnap people on the street, kidnap kids and smuggle them across the border with strangers and then drop them off on the other side. Or maybe we'll smuggle them back and do it over and over and over again for the rest. Like, what is that? Can't allow that to go on. And the second reason why we got to lock down the border is we should not allow other countries to dictate our immigration policies. We are a generous people. Remember, we talked to Ken Cuccinelli, former head of the Homeland Security, a couple weeks ago. He said, of the last 40 years, Donald Trump and the Trump administration was number 1, number 3, and number 10 when it came to number of people granted asylum. Right? Number 3, like the most people granted asylum, the 3rd most, and the 10th most out of the last 40 years. Here's the key with that. First, we're a generous people. Second, we decided that. We did that. We decided who gets asylum and how many people. Not other countries. We did. I would never expect to be able to dictate French immigration policy. But we let other countries determine ours. Doesn't make any sense. Biden absolutely caused this, and the Democrats allow it. It's a terrible thing, and it's going to backfire on them, right? It's going to backfire because as this gets worse and worse, as you just heard, worse in 20 years than any time in the last 20 years, it's going to backfire because another Trump is going to come in and make this the top issue again. Right? This is Trump's number 1 top issue. You don't think another Trump's going to come do the same thing? It's not a good move for the Democrats morally. It's not a good move politically either. End the COVID lockdowns, restart the border lockdowns. Coming up next, I want to talk about victimhood. We see people pretending to be victims all the time, acting like they're victims all the time. Where's that come from? What's the psychological root of that? Talk about that next. True story. Mike Slater, spread the word. Hey, Study Crusaders. I want to take some time here and talk about why so many people go out of their way and want to be seen as victims. In our country, we used to value overcoming obstacles, right? You would boast, or you wouldn't even boast, but people would boast on your behalf about, oh, look at him, he overcame so much. Now we boast proudly about how we can't even. Oh, I just can't even. I can't overcome the obstacles that life has placed in front of me. What's up with that? Where'd that come from? So let's back it up. Are you familiar with Munchausen Syndrome? Munchausen Syndrome, it's a mental illness where someone fakes being sick, or they'll even make themselves sick on purpose. So you got Munchausen's, people making up illnesses, and then you have Munchausen by proxy. So this is where you make someone else sick. Like The Sixth Sense. Have you seen The Sixth Sense in the last 20 years? That's Munchausen by proxy. The mom is making the daughter sick on purpose. Then we have Munchausen. By the way, Munchausen is named after a real life person, but this is going to be a long segment, so we'll save that for another day. Then we had Munchausen by internet. Okay, so Munchausen, then Munchausen by proxy, then Munchausen by internet. And this is people making up illnesses on the internet to get sympathy and attention from others. And you see people do this all the time, whether it's well-intentioned or not. And I'm not saying people make this up all the time, but you may leave something on Facebook or whatever, and it gets like 3 likes, right? But then you say something bad, like someone's sick, or someone passed away, or something bad like that, then you get 1,000 comments and loves and likes and whatever, right? Well, some people do that and make it up because they like the attention. Right? And it's perfect to do over the internet because no one can tell if you're lying or not. So Munchausen by proxy, Munchausen by internet, and now we have a new updated version of this, and I don't have a fancy schmancy name for it yet. Working title, Munchausen by race. Maybe we'll go with that for now. Someone can come up with a better name for it. MikeSlater.locals.com. Leave a comment there on a better name for this. But this is where people make up their victimhood status. They make it up. Are you really a victim? No. But you make it up. Why? Two reasons. Either you've experienced a trauma in your life, like a legitimate actual trauma in your life, that you don't think has received the attention or sympathy it deserves. Or you've lived a boring, meaningless life, and someone makes up victimhood to find meaning. Those are two different things. I want to talk about both of them. A couple stories first. 1998, there were two people who performed at a concert, a Holocaust remembrance concert. These two people were child survivors of the Holocaust. Right? They went to a concentration camp, the whole thing, right? So they performed at this concert, and someone thought it'd be a good idea if these two child survivors, who didn't know each other yet, they thought it'd be great if they got lunch. They said, hey, you guys should go get lunch. Okay, so great. They decided to go get lunch and share their stories with each other. Turns out they both made it up. They were both lying about being Holocaust survivors. Why? They each lived traumatic lives, and they wanted to be attached to something of meaning. They wanted their lives to be attached to something of meaning, and they did it by claiming to be victims of a terrible, terrible thing. This happens to different degrees and to different extents during every traumatic event. So 9/11, there was a woman who was on the 78th floor. A dying man asked her to give his wedding ring to his soon-to-be widow, and she tells this whole story about that. And she has all these harrowing tales, and none of it happened. 9/11 happened, of course, but she wasn't there. She was a nurse in Spain at the time. She wasn't even in the country. Now, what's weird is she never profited from this. And people with Munchausen, they don't seek to profit from this either, really. She just wanted to be connected to it for her own emotional benefit. It gave her meaning. And like I said, every traumatic event, every natural disaster at least, has people who do this to different degrees, right? Because we're very narcissistic, right? We're narcissistic people and we center ourselves in everything. Every time there's a hurricane or a tsunami or a shooting or a fire, people always tell the story centering themselves, right? The shooting the other day in Georgia, we have family who live close to that. So I could tell her, oh, you saw the shooting in Georgia? Yeah, my family, we live pretty close to that actually. It's totally irrelevant to the story. Like that doesn't add anything to it, but it's just me. Like here's my connection to it, right? Or there's some earthquake. Oh yeah, I was there. A hurricane. Oh yeah, when we evacuated, right? Everyone's got to center themselves in the story because that's just what we do. Okay, so first argument. So much of racial grievance today are people who, again, have had lives with traumatic events, but they feel like their trauma hasn't been given the sympathy it deserves. So they had something bad happen in their lives in their childhood, and they think, why don't enough people feel bad for me? Why aren't I showered with sympathy and sorrow here? So you can now instead, so what they do instead is associate themselves as victims of, well, the relevant case here, the greatest tragedy in history, perhaps, slavery. Right? So they're not getting the attention they want over here. So they say, oh, well, I'm a victim of the legacy of slavery. Now will you give me the attention I want? Now, they say they're a victim of the legacy of slavery. Are you? No. No more than those two people who were Holocaust survivors, or the woman was a 9/11 survivor while she was in Spain. You're not any closer related to slavery than those people. But it gives you emotional connection to something that gives you public sympathy that you think you're entitled to. So it's people who have experienced a trauma that think they haven't been given attention that they deserve, or it's people who think they've lived pretty meaningless, empty lives. And that's because we've all grown up in a nihilist culture. Nothing matters. We come from chance. This is all life is. You die, and that's the end of it. There is no God. So people are empty inside. And they've decided to find meaning by associating themselves with a terrible thing, whether it's slavery or the killing of the indigenous peoples or some racial grievance that has zero relevance to today. Some examples of that, Jessica Krug. She's a black immigrant from the Caribbean. She's a professor at George Washington University in DC. She wrote all these books about African-American history in Latin America, won a bunch of awards and fellowships, whole thing. It was all a lie. was a lie. She's actually a white Jewish girl from the suburbs of Kansas City. So like, that's such an interesting psychological thing. Like, why would a white Jewish girl from the suburbs of Kansas City pretend to be a black immigrant from the Caribbean? Why would you do that? That's so interesting. Here's her admission. She says, to say that I clearly been battling some unaddressed mental health demons for my entire life as an adult and child is obvious. Mental health issues likely explain why I assumed a false identity initially as a youth and why I continued to develop it for so long. The mental health professionals from whom I've so belatedly seeking help assure me, here it is, that this is a common response to some of the severe trauma that marked my early childhood and teen years. Trauma, so then you escape it by running and coming up with a new identity. And in our culture today, victims are rewarded. H.G. Carrillo, writer, professor of English at also George Washington University. He was a Cuban immigrant who left Cuba at the age of 7 with his family. Wrote all these books about his experience as a Cuban refugee and all that. He actually passed away from COVID, unfortunately. And when he passed away, his family released a statement saying who he really was. He was not a Cuban refugee. He's a black guy from Detroit. And his last name was Carroll, not Carrillo. I know Jesse Kelly loves Sean King pretending to be black. I'll save that story for him. My favorite is Alec Baldwin. That's the great Black Lives Matter activist, Sean King. My favorite story is Alec Baldwin's wife, Hilaria Baldwin. She is from Spain, and she's got this pretty thick Spanish accent. I saw an interview with her, and she was doing like some cooking thing on the Today Show, and she's talking about all the different ingredients, and I don't have a good Spanish accent. And she goes, we need a little bit of this, and we need a little bit of this as we make the paella, and we need some this, and we need some, how do you say, cucumbers, we need some cucumbers. She calls her family the Baldwinitos. She's not from Spain. She's white. Her name's Hilaria. She's from Boston. She got 2 white parents. Rachel Dolezal is the most famous example of this, right? She was the president of the Spokane, Washington NAACP. She's white, president of the NAACP. Her trauma was she was raised by, she calls it a cult-like fundamentalist Christian family. She hated her childhood, and to escape it, she would imagine that she was adopted. And in her head, she would make up this fake identity for herself in order to distance herself from the trauma of her childhood. And she never stopped doing it. It's really no different than transgenderism. We talked on the radio show on Monday, I think, with Walt Heyer, and he runs a group called sexchangeregrets.com. And he works with transgender people with gender dysmorphia all the time. And the question he always asks, he says, why do you hate the person you are? What are you running from? What happened? And so he says, what happened? What happened? That's what it is. What happened that caused you to hate the person you are? He says 100% of the time, gender dysmorphia comes from a traumatic event of their childhood. 100% of the time. He's dealt with thousands of people. Same thing here. What trauma happened that's causing you to pretend to be a victim today with things that you're not a victim of? It's a form of Munchausen Syndrome, claiming to be a member of an oppressed group when you're not. Why? Why would someone do that? Well, we live in such an empathetic society, right? There's value in being seen as a victim. I'm trying to think of if you were an Egyptian in ancient Egypt with Pharaoh, no way would you go and be like, hey, Pharaoh, I'm a Jew. I'm a Jew. Go ahead, shackle me up and let's get building some pyramids. Like that wouldn't happen. Like, you would never claim to be an oppressed group because that sucked. You didn't want to be in an oppressed. But today in America, people are tripping over themselves to claim they're in an oppressed group, which proves really that you're not that oppressed. Being a victim is valued today. Elizabeth Warren's not the only one. Why does Meghan Markle, whose dad is white, and Meghan Markle doesn't even look black. She looks as black as Sean King. Why does she claim to Oprah that she's oppressed and a victim of racism? Well, it doesn't make any sense. People are desperate to claim that status of a victim. It's hard to overcome things, right? Again, we used to value that as a society, people who overcome difficult things. It's hard to do that. It's hard to overcome things. It's much easier to succumb to them and claim victimhood. And in victimhood, you can find a type of suffering that has a meaning beyond yourself. And finally, for so many people, a type of suffering that people will pay attention to. Those are extreme examples I just shared. But how many people do you know that do similar versions on a smaller scale, right? They don't pretend to be a different race, right? But they're still claiming to be a victim all the time, claiming to be oppressed when they're just not. Or when it's self-imposed, it's the consequences of your own decisions. But no one wants to hear that. We got to get back. The true story is we got to get back to a society that once again values overcoming obstacles in life. Let's encourage that again. True story. Mike Slater. Spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders, got great news. While California and other crazy states are doubling down on critical race theory and the 1619 Project and just straight indoctrination of our kids in schools, they're going further that direction. States like Florida are going in this direction. Here's the governor.
Florida civics curriculum will incorporate foundational concepts with the best materials, and it will expressly exclude unsanctioned narratives like critical race theory and other unsubstantiated theories. Let me be clear, there's no room in our classrooms for things like critical race theory. Teaching kids to hate their country and to hate each other is not worth 1 red cent of taxpayer money.
As we say, the only thing that rivals kids' contempt for America is their ignorance of it. And that comes from critical race theory and 1619 Project and all these other things that we're teaching our kids today, ethnic studies and the rest. Well done, DeSantis. Scott Hounsel's here from Red State. What's going on, Scott?
How goes it, Mike? Nice to see you again.
Man, good to talk to you, brother. What do you make of this and the courage, truly, that it took for DeSantis to do that? Even the crowd, it sounded a little like, am I allowed to clap for this? Am I going to be canceled?
Right. Everyone, the left-wing media was all turning around, taking names, writing down names on name badges and start doxing people.
So what do you think of the courage to do that?
I love it, and this is what has made DeSantis like kind of the out front runner. He obviously came in second behind Trump at CPAC. The front runner is because of the fact that he's willing to stand up to these issues. He's willing to say, hey, you know what, enough's enough. On the same page of saying, well, we're not going to allow critical race theory to be taught in the classroom. I also don't think he's going to allow for hate to be taught in, any hate, racial hate or any of the rest of it. This isn't that he's like out there saying, well, we're going to go back to this other stuff. He's saying like the critical race theory, unsubstantiated, first off, is one of the big things that we have to cover. And second is that all it does is teach the children either to self-loathe. I am a problem. I created this issue. I'm the one that's going to further these problems in the country, versus teaching them about how to self-empower, to say, hey, you know what, you guys are great. You guys can do anything in the world. It's backwards thinking in a lot of ways. It's teaching people that the things that are wrong with society and them are someone else's fault, and most of the time it isn't.
Yeah. Let's jump over to some hypocrisy. Gavin Newsom, just the other day on CNN, he said that he said something like, I'm a Zoom parent too, or I've had to work through Zoom school or something. But his kids, 4 kids, have been going to a private school in person since November. That to me that's the second biggest reason why I voted to recall Gavin Newsom. Like that hypocrisy, and then now doubling down and lying about it is unacceptable. And we have this picture of John Kerry not wearing a mask on an airplane as well. What do we make of this hypocrisy?
It's par for the course with Gavin Newsom. I think that his State of the State speech at Dodger Stadium was the biggest slap to taxpayers' faces in the world. Like, hey, no one can go here, but I can go here and do my State of the State speech and have empty stadiums behind him. I mean, just the optics of it are so mind-blowingly tone deaf. Of like, hey, we can't go to Dodger Stadium, we can't go see a Dodger game or the rest of it, but he can stand there and do his State of the State speech. He can send his kids to school. He can go out of state. I mean, remember he went and traveled to campaign for Biden when everyone else was told, don't leave the state, don't try, no unnecessary travel. He left the state. I mean, everything all the way down, the French Laundry, everything that he's done all along the way is just raging hypocrisy. And we've got to remember that this is the left. This is the hallmark of the left. That they are always hypocritical. They always say, you do what I tell you to do, but I get to live however I want to. And so it's maddeningly frustrating, especially with like now John Kerry not wearing a mask on a plane. Now, granted, it was hooked on his ear and he may have forgotten to put it back on and yada, 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 yada. But I have flown twice in the last 2 months, both times to Florida to go where it's now open. And both times I had like my mask. I fell asleep at one point and my mask fell below my nose. And I got woken up both times by the hey, wake up, put your mask back on by the flight attendants. And so, I mean, I don't understand how they obviously aren't going to correct Kerry because it's John Kerry. And then that therefore has a double standard. And we all are enforced. Other rules are enforced on us, but not on them. It's so ridiculous. And so, I mean, this is the hallmark of the left, though.
I look forward to getting your numbers on, because for everyone who doesn't know, Scott's the numbers guy over at Res Day. Getting your numbers on the recall of Newsom. We could talk about that another day. But the power, I think it's power, but what is it about their philosophy, their worldview, their mindset, their personalities of these Democrat leaders who have taken so much power and are so reluctant to relinquish it still, even as opposed to DeSantis, who was like quick to give up any power that he had.
Right. I mean, you look at Michigan, where Whitmer, the legislature's looking to repeal their emergency powers. In New York, they've already done it against Cuomo. I think that there's enough people waking up now that they're going, well, wow, if government has the power to tell me to stay home during a pandemic, they have the power to tell me to stay home whenever. And I think enough people are upset about it. Here in the Southern California area, there's a restaurant called Tim Horn Flats that has been open, and they've tried to shut it down. City of Burbank got court orders to allow them to shut off the power. Tim Horn Flats opened up under generators. They got a permit to padlock the door. They opened up through a side door. I mean, they just are saying, I think enough people have had enough of this. And I think that people are waking up to the fact that it's primarily Democrat controlled. You're looking at the states that have the worst unemployment and the worst economic factors right now. They're all blue, almost exclusively. And so that right there is where you have to understand that this is a Democrat controlled issue.
I want to pivot a little bit, but not that much, to just cancel culture and the targeting of this stuff on kids and kids, like cartoons and obviously in our schools and how we're teaching our kids this political correctness, but that doesn't even begin to get to the depth of it. Why target kids?
Well, kids are the future. I mean, we already know what the Nazis believed about children. And so they obviously didn't work on the older German areas. They went to youth and they created this idea that we're gonna control the future through the youth. The Soviets did the same thing. This is not like this is a authoritarian tactic. Go after the children, change the children's mind, make them believe certain things about their society, about their country, about things that, and so if they automatically are raised to believe or automatically taught to believe that everything is racist, everything creates a victim, everything is wronging someone in some way, that they're going to eventually have an issue. that is going to back up on them. And we're now starting to see it where people are saying, wait a second, we're now canceling Dr. Seuss and Pepe Le Pew. Those things don't have anything to do with it. I actually sent out a tweet the other day that was like, when people think that Pepe Le Pew's behavior somehow shapes children's behavior, I want to drop an anvil-shaped piano on their head because it's just so stupid. It's just absolutely so stupid to think that that's actually somehow creating this thing. The kids aren't jumping off rooftops thinking they have Dumbo ears. Think kids aren't doing things that are just it's stupid to believe that this entertainment is somehow altering the behavior in a way that is creating rape culture or racism or any of the rest of these stupid things that they're now forwarding with this agenda.
Yeah, my worry is it'll never end either. We got 1 minute. Give me one last thing that you guys are talking about at Red State that no one's paying attention to.
Well, obviously the Washington Post retraction is a big story that we're still covering over there. We just talked about it last night on our VIP Gold Chat. Is that the Washington Post, along with other CNN, have the ability to post these stories that literally shape agendas and shape. I mean, they impeached Trump twice on false narratives created by stories, and then months and weeks later, someone suddenly sent out these retractions that are quiet and everything else. And so I think that we need to start holding our media much more accountable, and I think that we need to come up with some consequences to these negative stories that are never followed up on.
No, there's no skin in the game there, right? I mean, it's
right.
No one at the Washington Post, not even whoever that source was. Do we know who those anonymous sources were ever?
It's Jordan Fuchs, the deputy Secretary of State, Jordan Fuchs.
And he's fired, right? And he's kicked out of his job?
She still has her job.
Okay, yeah, of course.
And of course, everyone in the Washington Post still has their job. But yet we and conservative media are being metered and have issues with getting our stories seen because social media and big tech and everyone is metering our stories. Now, you've been following us long enough to know Red State, we really take pride in making sure that our sources are clear. We have the evidence to back things up. We aren't just going, oh, this anonymous person said this and we're running the story. But yet, even though we source everything, we use CDC facts or travel records with the Secret Service or whatever it may be, we are getting the ones that are getting told we can't publish stuff. Yet, when they literally admit to publishing lies, there's nothing. There's not even a slap on the wrist. Everyone gets to keep their job. Everyone gets to go back to life as normal. And yet any of the rest of us who are actually doing true journalism are being told, no, that's not right. We're not going to let you publish that.
Scott Hounsel, you're the man. Appreciate you, brother.
Thanks, man.
Scott from Red State. And just the big one is there's going to be no consequences from COVID either. All the public health officials who had us do all this stuff, there's no consequence. They'll keep their jobs. They'll continue to keep their jobs and set horrible precedents for the future. We'll never learn. Coming up next, Congressman Mike Kelly's going to be here. We'll talk about the tax increases that are coming shortly. And we have an amazing special coming up tonight. It's really, really important about opioids and drug abuse in America. And it's a big problem where his district is in Pennsylvania as well. So we'll talk to him about that too coming up. True story, Mike Slater. Spread the word.
So let's just imagine a group of friends in high school who get together every Friday night and they're going to drink their case of Budweiser in somebody's home. Then they start grabbing pills from the cabinets and they're adding to it. So now they're starting to use it, but these are pharmaceutical grade pills. Could they die from it? Yes, but that's applied where there's a way. Mom and dad aren't going to buy you more pills. Grandma's not going to buy you more pills, so now you got to buy pills. So you ask around and so-and-so's selling pills on a street corner. Looks the same, smells the same, we're gonna take it. But here's the difference. Those aren't chemists, those aren't people that are trained to make pills. So you can have one pill that is 100% fentanyl, or you can have one pill that's 100% cut.
And dealers are street pharmacists, right? They're gonna mix whatever gets the person the high, and there's no, okay, we're gonna have 2 ounces here and 3 ounces here of this. There's none of that. I'm just going to do this and this and this, and here's my drug, and you want it. This is how much it's going to cost. Go use it. If you like it, come back.
America's Forgotten Epidemic premieres Thursday, March 18th at 9 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on The First.
Tonight at 9. We got to get to the root of that issue. There's no doubt about it. And now the first segment, we didn't mention that, but that's it. We talked about lockdowns, 2 different lockdowns. Got to end the COVID lockdowns, and we got to re-lock down the border. And those 2 things would help this crisis as well. At least it would get closer to the actual root of it. Congressman Mike Kelly is here. He represents Western Pennsylvania, Eastern, that's Erie, and down a little bit south as well. Congressman, how are you, sir?
Good, Michael. Thanks for having me on. And
Man,
very
good to talk to
timely,
you again,
just watching the lead-in. That's an epidemic in my hometown, and has been that way now for at least maybe 2 decades.
Wow. What's the societal effect of it?
The side effect, I mean, we're losing generations of people that are supposed to be coming on board. And unfortunately, I'm too close to it. A lot of what I did in the private sector, in addition to being an automobile dealer, was I coached children's sports. There was nothing more sad for me than to go to a funeral home and to pay my respects to one of my former players. And as you go in, we have this thing. We've always put pictures of whomever it is as they're growing up. So they'd be there in their little Penn Street Cardinal uniform, or they'd be in their little Marlin, the Kelly Marlins. And I would see this little boy and then go up and say a prayer over his coffin and say, what happened? What happened? I mean, how did we go from this happy childhood where everything was fine and you were growing up in a small town in America and you had all these things that you were able to do, and then all of a sudden you've gone down this other road and we've lost you and we can never regain you. And then it doesn't just affect that child, it affects his or her family. All friends and neighbors and everybody else looks at this and they can't understand the loss and why that loss took place. And they're thinking, why didn't I know more? What didn't I see? Or what was I willing to say, hey, look, it's just something that they're going through. I think it's absolutely incredible what's happened.
There's a ton of
going on. It is absolutely crucial.
Thanks, Congressman. And I got to talk to you about tax cuts as well. We only got about 4 minutes, but just one more thing on this. There's obviously a myriad of reasons, right? There's a ton of factors that come into it that are going to be discussed tonight. What's one that you think is very important or not often talked about how a child ends up going down that path instead of the better one?
You know what, my feeling on this, there's been such a disconnect now between people who are raising children and actually being in their lives. Just what we've become now. It used to be a boy and a girl get together, they fall in love, they become a husband and a wife, then they become a mother and a father. And our nuclear family has been destroyed in so many different ways. A lot of it by the intervention of government programs that made it more survivable to be separated than to be together. So I think that in some cases, latchkey children especially, who are left on their own at a time in their life when they need some oversight, some direction, they're not able to get it. And I will tell you the other thing, Mike, and I know people may not like this. When I'm the youngest guy at Mass, that's a problem. It used to be children. Parents came in with children, and we even got to the point where we had to build cry rooms so that when the babies would act up or the children would act up, it wasn't interfering with the priest or the minister's homily. And now there's nobody in church where I live right now. You've got to call and ask if you can come to church that day because we're only allowed to have certain people in church. It is a mammoth church. And I like to go to Mass every morning because it helps me start my day. We have put so many restrictions on people and taken them away from their normal life patterns into something different. But this started in the 50s as far as breaking our families apart with a government that had to interfere with the way you raised your children. The other problem I have, and I tell people all the time, please run for school board. Please get on your school board. Please look at the textbooks we're using and the curriculum we're using and get involved. Forget about who the football coach is or the basketball coach or where the bus stops or your school taxes. Look at the product that's coming out of our schools right now and then sit back and say, how did this happen? It happened because you disengaged. If you disengage and you let another group of people raise your children for you, bad deal.
That's so right, Congressman. We're letting other people raise our children for us. I've said this before. It's we criticize black families maybe because of the brokenness of black families and dad's not present. And white families, they may be like a lower divorce rate or a greater, what's wrong? Whatever, like the couples start off married or whatever, but they can be present but not really present is what I'm getting at. They can be there and married and in the same house, yet still not present. You can be present but not present. And there's obviously major consequences to that. And Congressman, I got 30 seconds, then we got to run, and that's all we can talk about today, but this is important. So what do you say to that?
Well, listen, I'm with you on that. I think that the presence is one thing, but you've got to be involved. Not being involved with your child's life is critical. And this idea that somehow they'll be okay. If you leave them to themselves, they'll be okay. They'll grow up the right way. As soon as you walk away from that, they can go any way they want without that oversight, without that. It was called parenting. That's what parents are supposed to do. And now we walk away from it and say, no, I don't have time to do that. I said, you don't have time. The hell you don't. That's the most important role you can be. The most important role in society is that of a mother and a father, and both of them fulfilling the needs and the roles that they're supposed to. I'm talking about traditional roles. I'm not talking about some of this crazy woke idea about, no, this isn't who we are. Or these cultural parts that are out there. You know what? This is America. America was the greatest country in the world and is the greatest country in the world because of how we brought our children up and the way we raised them. And that we're walking away from things that are absolutely critical. I wish I had a better answer, Mike. The only thing is, if you're a mom and a dad, be a mom and a dad. Be a mom and a dad. Don't be a casual person in and out of their lives.
That's the truth, Congressman. I'm glad this was a much more important conversation than tax cuts. We'll save that one for another day. Thanks, Congressman. Appreciate you. It's Congressman Mike Kelly right there from Western
Keep up the good work, Mike.
Thank you, sir. And remember, it's not just you're letting kids raise themselves, you're handing them over to people who have worldviews that are very different, opposite, and even hate yours. You're letting those people raise your kids. True story, Mike Slater, spread the word.